All right. Hi, so my name is Elliot Patterson, and this is the presentation for my internship with Injury and Violence Prevention Branch of DPH. We're going to go through a little background, talk about the internship and its goals. I've got some tools to talk about that I used on the project, a gallery of some of the visualizations, and then we'll go through lessons learned, and I'll have a little time at the end for a Q&A if y'all want to ask me things. So for the background, who is the Injury and Violence Prevention Branch? Injury and violence form the third leading cause of death among North Carolina residents and the leading cause of death for people ages 1 through 60. The Injury and Violence Prevention Branch within the NC Division of Public Health addresses injury and violence by facilitating the development and implementation of a statewide strategic plan, facilitating statewide collaborations and partnerships, and maintaining the data collection and reporting for prevention strategies. So this is a little graphic from the Injury-Free NC website showing the quantities of types of injuries, and it's a little preview of where our data comes from for this project. We were looking at the top 3 on this triangle: deaths, hospitalizations, and ED visits. So there are some existing data visualizations that the branch uses. As you can see, they focus on single causes of injury and death for the most part, so they're grouped under topics. There's an existing alcohol data dashboard that shows relevant information about alcohol-related injury and death. And then there are also some screenshots on here from the Opioid and Substance Use Action Plan, which is a dashboard that tracks implementation of that program and shows data related to opioid and substance use, overdoses, and death. For my project, we were looking at the core 3 data sources, although there are many more data sources used within the branch. We were looking at death records from the State Center for Health Statistics, hospital records that come from a source called NC Detect, and emergency department records also from the State Center for Health Statistics. And I noted on here that although these data sources are already used for data visualization and reports primarily at the topic level, data quality review and harmonization strategy needed to be developed for this integrated injury visualization project in order to combine them all together to stack the metrics into one data set. We also worked with some supplemental data sources for this. We used the Census for population data for some of this project. And there are a couple of surveys that are conducted by the CDC, like nationwide, the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System and the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And these were in a very different format from the other data sources. They were questions and answers that had been directed to individuals to assess risk of injury. They were not like the hospital billing codes for injury themselves. So an early part of this project involved figuring out how to incorporate that data into visualizations, again, in a single stacked data set in a way that was going to make sense. So we needed to be flexible with our data structure and our visualizations so that we could accommodate including data from other sources and eventually more that we had not yet looked at for this project. So the description of my internship was the development of a multiple injury indicator project. Again, instead of separating types of injuries out by topics, we wanted to be able to look at to select from all of them. So for that, I needed to enumerate the indicators, collect metadata that describe the indicators, that describe the data sources, and build a harmonized database and also visual dashboards. And I created documentation on the process and the work products to hand off to the team at the end of my internship. And that documentation, some of it was intended to be used internally to inform the team working on the project going forward, and then some of it was to inform public-facing information so that when people go look at these visualizations once they're published, they can then download documentation on how the things are created and what they all mean. We had weekly meetings between me and the rest of the team, some of whom are here with us today, to discuss progress, co-work, and brainstorm. The bulk of my time was spent doing data harmonization in R, reviewing the data that had come through SAS from another team member, doing data cleanup, data quality checks, and building dashboards in an iterative process. So I would work with some data, make some visualizations, pass it to the team for review, make suggested changes. That was pretty much how the project went. So the tools we used for this were Lucidchart, which is a really good software to diagram concepts. That was mostly to show how the processes would work, how the tables would relate to each other. I kept all of my meeting notes and documentation in Google Drive and shared that with the team. We used a Google Sheet to plan the table structure together. I thought that was a really successful use of it. We had a Google Sheet where there were multiple tabs for each table that would exist in the data set. And then in some of our meetings, we would look at that sheet together and talk about what was on it, co-work, and then I could download from the Google Sheet into R to add that to the data set. Most of my code, all of my code was in R Studio. That was where the data harmonization was happening. And then I built the data visualizations in Tableau. So here's a gallery of some pictures. These are some of the visualizations I created for the project. The left shows an example of a dashboard in Tableau that is created from multiple visualizations, which are all controlled by the drop-down menu at the top right. So all of the text areas and the images in this example on the left show information relevant to the selected indicator up at the top, which says death, firearm, assault in that drop-down menu. And all the text and all the visualizations are informed by indicator and data source metadata. The visualization on the right is another example of comparing indicators. We're comparing the per county rate of poisoning deaths with the per county rate of self-harm poisoning hospitalizations. So we've got the deaths on the left and the hospitalizations on the right, and then you can see which counties respectively have higher and lower rates for each of these. And it's an example of comparing multiple indicators across different data sources. And then in the lower right-hand corner here, these are the table relationships. So indicators relate to a place table. Indicators can be grouped into topics through relationship with the indicator topic table. And then indicators, data sources, and topics all have their own descriptive metadata that we then used to inform the text in some of these visualizations. A unique visualization I created for this was the data completeness checklist, and I don't think this one is going to be published. This is one that I made to track some of my work process. This was in Tableau, the same software that was used to build the other data visualizations, the same workbook. And what this does is it gives me a little dot if certain data sources contain certain kinds of information. So on the lower left here, we can see topics have years. So under the firearms topic, we can see that I've only got 1 year of data for the hospital data, but I have many years of data for the death certificates from this SCHS. That's the second row under firearms there, and then multiple years for VDRS. So as I was going through building the database, I was using this to check what data I had already imported or needed to import so that I could make sure if the visualization wasn't showing me a thing I expected, this was a second way to check and make sure that maybe that data just wasn't already there. Lessons and challenges from this project, starting with challenges. I've got 3 things named here: wireframes, the role of content knowledge, and then a little bit about personal identity working on the team at the state. The team that I worked with had spent extensive time before bringing me on thinking about wireframes and how they wanted the data to be visualized, but those weren't necessarily already documented, and I struggled a little bit to pull that information out and understand it in team meetings. And one of the reasons I think that was challenging for me was the fire hose of information that I had to absorb about epidemiological concepts, internal data flow, just underlying theory and concepts that inform the work that the team does that I was then joining and trying to pull from to create all of this. So that there was a lot of time spent, self-teaching and researching within the team's existing documentation, within the state shared drive, within other resources, just to catch myself up. And another significant challenge that I want to note was integrating within the state hiring structure, the organizational hierarchy as a transgender person, because I have a preferred name that is different from my legal name. I have not yet changed my legal name, and that can present some challenges when organizational policies require the legal name to be the display name. So there is the awkwardness of communication, maybe showing two different names and people wondering if that was two different people, or being outed as trans and having awkward questions asked because my names didn't match. And anybody else in that situation, I think I would recommend just considering what that might look like. We all learned some lessons together, though. As a team, we tried to use GitHub, which is a version control software. So I have a copy of a project that we're working on together on my desktop. I make some changes to it and then push the updated version with the changes to a centralized location online where my team members can then download it so that we're all keeping up with the changes that we're making together. And we're trying to do that to solve the problem of working with project contributors who didn't have state machines, who didn't have access to the internal locations of data that I can access through VPN on my state-issued laptop. But it was challenging to manage certain files in the shared project could be uploaded publicly to GitHub, and some of them needed to only remain on our machines because HIPAA protections, data suppression issues, some data needed to not be public. But it was challenging to manage those uploads across machines that had different levels of access and different levels of privacy. So that part of the project has been deferred by the team for the moment. After several revisions of the wireframe process, the team met without me to create the wireframes and then shared the visualizations with me so that I can work from those. And we established one-on-one meetings with my supervisor instead of having all team meetings together to co-work. So that was a shift from the way we had initially agreed on our work together happening. We changed some of the structure of how we worked together toward the end of the project. And about code review sessions, that's a need that I had throughout this project, was more time doing like a read through of the code that I had written and getting feedback on the effectiveness of it, the efficiency of what I was writing. I did learn a lot, though, by deconstructing some of the existing Tableau dashboards that had already been built by the team, so that I could learn how they were constructed and document some of the kind of advanced workarounds that had been applied. Oh, and it's question time. I guess I went through that pretty fast. All right.